Again, hello, and thank you all for joining. My name is Sabrina Baptiste, the project director for the Pathways Alliance here at Innovate EDU. I'm excited to be joined by an incredible group of panelists who are bringing perspectives from higher education, research, and practice. Today, you'll hear from Stephen Weiner with ASU, Bridget Burns from the University of Innovation and Alliance, Kim Reinierson from Texas A&M University Systems, and Suzanne Ehrlich with the University of North Florida. We'll hear from each of them shortly, but first, I want to ensure that today you will hear a little bit of framing about the AI literacy framework. You will also get a discussion from our panelists, and then we'll end with a Q&A and as well as a quick poll regarding our National AI Literacy Day. So we do hope that you stick around towards the end to fill out the poll. I want to take a few minutes to ground us in the broader landscape and the AI literacy framework that's shaping this conversation. To equip you with good understanding of the framework and how it might apply in your unique context, it's important to think about this framework not just as a standalone, but alongside a set of other documents, strategies, and actions across multiple agencies. I want to highlight a couple of those so that you have a reference point when you're thinking about AI literacy. First is the President's AI Action Plan that was released in July of 2025. In that action plan, the call for a literacy framework from the Department of Labor was outlined. So that's really where the Department of Labor got the assignment. Then the Department of Labor, Department of Commerce, and the Department of Education came together later in 2025 and put together America's Talent Strategy. This document lays out a vision for how to bring together K-12, higher ed, workforce, and on-the-job learning to prepare America's workforce for AI and other technologies. In August of 2025, the Department of Education introduced a Dear Colleague letter on AI literacy for state and local education agencies. This really clarified that it's a grant-making priority and also that Title II and Title V funds can support AI literacy in the educator workforce. Title IV funds. And finally, guidance connected to WIOA promotes developing AI skills. This serves as a directive to state and local workforce boards to think about AI literacy as a design, programs, training, and competency frameworks. Next slide, please. Within the Department of Labor, it's important to understand that programs operate in two primary ways. Some are funded at the federal level, and about 50% of those funds flow to state and local workforce boards. With that mandate, the AI Action Plan, the Department of Labor released the AI Literacy Framework on February 13th. This framework outlines that 5 content areas and 7 delivery principles. The goal was to give workforce boards, training providers, education agencies, and others working at the intersection of education and workforce a shared understanding of what AI literacy means, what competencies should be developed, and how to keep pace with the technology in the modern workforce. This is also an expectation that this framework will be updated and integrated into the competency model clearinghouse. It's also important to call out that the framework highlights critical infrastructure, including broadband and connectivity, and the need to ensure access to everyone so that way everyone can benefit from these opportunities. Next slide, please. This framework defines AI literacy as a foundational set of competencies that enables individuals to use and evaluate AI technologies, and of course, responsibly, with a particular focus on generative AI, which is increasingly central to the modern workplace. There's also a full narrative that accompanies that framework. You're likely seeing this wonderful infographic version. It's quick and it's accessible, but we do encourage you to read the full narrative for deeper context, highlighting that it is 11 pages, but we do ask you to dig in. The framework is really designed for multiple audiences across the ecosystem. For workers, it helps them understand what AI literacy means for their careers and how to build those skills. For employers, it's preparing workers to use AI tools effectively and responsibly. For education and training providers, it's about reviewing curriculum and identifying where AI literacy can be integrated, including digital and media literacy. And for state and local agencies, it's about advancing AI literacy across both workforce and education systems. Across all of this, there is a clear emphasis not on just using AI, but understanding how it works, inputs, outputs, and the ethical considerations that come with it. Next slide, please. This wonderful image helps us conceptualize how all these pieces fit together. There is a set of executive actions, and we've linked all of these resources in the slide so you can explore them further. There's a role of state and local agencies, particularly in how they use funding and how AI literacy is positioned and the prerequisite content for workforce development. There's also a critical intersection with K-12 education, and we will continue to see more alignment with the education and labor as programs shift and as new funding streams emerge. That's including short-term Pell Grants and also workforce development grants. These represent opportunities where we can utilize resources, funding, and direction around curriculum and outreach. That was a quick overview, but we hope this provides a strong foundation of understanding the AI literacy framework. Now, I do want to turn it over to our panelists to bring this to life and what this actually looks like in higher education and education preparation, and also in practice. Bridget, I'd love to start with you. You work across a network of 19 higher education institutions. What are you seeing at some of the more innovative higher ed institutions as they consider AI literacy, training for their educators and staff?
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, and this is really it's a thrilling moment seeing more infrastructure and strategy evolve for the field. We're in a high activity, high pilot, low alignment moment, I would say. I work across 19 institutions in 19 states. They are all wrestling with very similar challenges, and when you're in the innovation moment, people are just kind of building stuff and figuring it out. But there are some early leaders that I think really stand out on a few different things. The first is Purdue, naturally, because they are the first clear example of moving from experimentation to actually embedding a full expectation by making AI competency a graduation requirement for every student in every major. And that is, you're just not seeing that anywhere else yet. I think others are going to follow. I think that is exactly where we need to go. And what's great is that Purdue is just a really generous thought partner. And so they're sharing what they are wrestling with and how they are actually building it. And that is what I think the posture of the higher education space needs to be, is we are in kind of a national lab moment where we actually need to be building and sharing how we're building so that other people are not needing to make the same mistakes. I think when it comes to integrating AI and building, solutions and interventions and focusing on scale, ASU is definitely, I think, leading. They have built a range of interventions that include things that connect directly to the classroom, a lot around efficiencies, the institution, and what they are doing and our institutions are doing is, I think, focusing right now on creating spaces where, in a highly competitive environment, which is what higher ed is, we compete on things even that we shouldn't be competing on, that you have to create spaces where people can actually iterate and share with each other in real time how they are doing things. And so they have built a range of really impressive solutions that now our other campuses are interested in scaling. And I think it's things where we're starting with where there are universal problems, where there are shared problems. So course equivalencies, it's much more nuts and bolts instead of, I know we want to talk about the classroom application. And so I would say I'm also seeing that across my institutions, you have Georgia State is also actually really far along when it comes to workforce aligned pipelines in terms of skills and literacy, building out the infrastructure and the content around that, but it's not yet required in a degree. So I think seeing the first mover of Purdue actually making it something that's required for graduation I think people are noticing. I think people are watching. I think other institutions, like you're seeing ASU, Michigan State, Central Florida, Riverside, they're all building different approaches that are, specific to their culture. What I'm most interested in is how the entire sector behaves. That we think about the institutions that are under-resourced, who are serving a lot of students. How are we making it so that they can benefit from the wisdom of the crowd and the experiments that are happening? So that's a space that we are definitely, I think, following the leadership of the EdSafe Alliance, and in terms of how do you actually model leadership for the field, in terms of sharing practical use and actually helping others replicate. So I would just leave with one example, which is we saw that every campus is struggling with the same problem of actually building out and deciding how to choose an AI enterprise provider. No institution has that office or has that experience. And once a campus has actually figured it out, we actually used those insights to build a rubric and a very simple document that helps any campus to be able to analyze any different contract around AI, which, again, this is about equipping people with the tools to ask the right questions around literacy and learning and safety. That this is a new emerging space. And I think that the natural posture of higher ed, if you don't have those kinds of tools, is to pause, and it is to exist in fear and to be nervous. And that means that we're going to leave students behind. That, especially when you think about this workforce component, which I love, you're going to see students who are not exposed to the kinds of AI literacy preparation that others are, and they are going to be left behind, and that's going to translate to mobility gaps. And so those are the kinds of things we're thinking about, is not just what experiments work and who's doing the right stuff as quickly as possible. How can we operate as a sector to learn from each other quickly and take care of each other, and actually build out the supports and learning and solutions so that other campuses with less resources are still able to support their students in a competitive space when we're watching what's happening with AI and jobs.
Thank you so much. And building on that, Suzanne, I would love to hear from you. There's often a real gap between having access to AI tools and using them in a meaningful, responsible way. From your perspective, what does that gap look like in practice? And because you've seen this gap, how has your university responded? And we've also would love to hear, what are you seeing regarding any educator readiness, support, or ongoing challenges?
Great question. And it's a tough act to follow with Bridget. She highlighted so many fantastic themes that we are also seeing in this huge transformation. I will start with following that with co-everything. I like the thematic aspect of the world of AI and design. We actually have an AI and design thinking challenge coming up on Friday, so I have it front of mind talking about this. But central to that, and building from the co-aspect, we've really examined it through the students as partners lens, looking at how we shape those experiences or opportunities, but with student voice as part of that. So what that means for us, it looks different across the entire university. So we've tiered out training for faculty, staff, and students in a number of ways, whether it's curriculum, whether it's experiential learning, like I've just identified, whether it's through club development, when we've tried to build this ecosystem so there's an entry point for everybody. And I think that really speaks to your question about what does that gap look like? And the gap is oftentimes for us, at least initially, where someone enters their space of interest around artificial intelligence. What we say is everyone should be at the table, similar to probably a number of issues and challenges that we're going to talk about today. But how do you create that space? So where is it that those conversations take place, so that the work that we're engaged in, similar to what Bridget was noting, where are we being transparent about our efforts and the output or the outcomes from those experiences? So really building in that ecosystem approach and creating an opportunity for everyone to think about AI. So if you look at the work that we're talking about today, it's not only the operational or technical aspects of AI, but it is who we are and the thinking around AI. And everyone in our ecosystem, even our industry stakeholders who participate in our experiential learning experiences, are invested in having a conversation about what that means for the now and for the future. And it is really imperative that we have parents, we have faculty, we have industry partners, leaders, you name it, at that table so that we're really creating that larger conversation and how it's impacting one another and amplifying student voice through those experiences. So, with it becoming a baseline of workforce skill and across the lifespan, I really think it's about meaningful and contextualized application. I know a lot of people are going to talk about use case, but what that looks like for school districts and on up into higher education is this uneven distribution of opportunity. So, how do we streamline those opportunities? How do we create greater access is important and imperative to our central conversation. So, that means even with our design challenge coming up on Friday, part of what we're designing is onboarding as part of that experience, knowing that each of the team of students who come from within our own organization who have opportunities for AI literacy development, they will still come in with a different schema around artificial intelligence. So we're constantly thinking about how do we then equalize some of that foundational knowledge. And I think that's imperative to addressing those gaps that will unfortunately, if not addressed, continue the digital divide that's happened in previous technology disruptions. That is taking place now that depending on where you are in your age timeline will remember back to other technological disruptions where those who had access and opportunity had a greater advantage than those that may not have had access. So I think it's really important to think about we have this exceptional pace that we're all keeping and what those resources might look like, but really streamlining the scaling and system implementation beyond experimentation and thinking about even and I'll say when we say across the lifespan, I know we're in higher education context and talking about that, but parental involvement, oftentimes I find when we talk about different gaps, is one of those others. So the individuals who are interacting with our students may not have a similar background or AI literacy that maybe our students are now exposed to in a different way. So as we continue on with our conversation, I'm curious how others are addressing this within their own ecosystems, but look forward to diving deeper into how AI literacy can really be supported by use case and experimental practices.
Great, thank you for your perspective. I agree that everybody does need to be at this table and it should be a priority to have these discussions. And I also want to bring this a little bit closer to the educator preparation and workforce. We're hearing a lot about tools, but not always about the support that's needed to use them well. Kim, from your perspective, why do you think educators need structured support, not just access to tools? And what does the effective support training or preparation actually look like in practice, especially for teacher educators?
Sure. Thank you, Sabrina. I will say that I don't think I've ever met anyone working in any domain that appreciates being given a tool without some level of support, without a vision for what you want to do with it, how it should be used, and so on. So, to that end, educators, those higher education educators who are preparing future teachers for our classrooms, need structured support, not just tools. So those could be if we're thinking about developing AI literacy, and I will mention sort of similar to Suzanne, we are kicking off an AI literacy effort this Friday on National AI Literacy Day. It's called an AI Learnathon, where we're trying to build AI literacy among our faculty and staff. So starting there, so that there's facility in using AI for those individuals as they prepare students in every field. So with that in mind, looking at our higher education faculty, designing some interactive prompt exercises to help them build the experiential judgment for what it looks like to use AI and to constantly keep that perspective on the content that they're getting and how they want it to be used. Then we want our faculty to be thinking about how would they help students learn how to use AI in an authentic real world occupational task. And so, in that sense, I think to across our system with the many teacher residency programs we have and the co-teaching models that we're using, that our teacher educators get the opportunity to co-develop lessons, and that could include co-developing AI embedded coursework with our K through 12 partners so that we're learning it in the classroom and then they're getting an opportunity to practice it when they're in their clinical placements before entering the field. And then related to this notion of effective support, training, and preparation, I think you always want to start with a baseline readiness assessment. No one appreciates it when you assume that they know nothing or that they know everything. So you've got to know where everyone's starting so that you can tailor that support for each individual. And the reality within a large organization is you're going to have varying levels of readiness among everyone. And then contextualizing what you're going to do with a tool and how it will be important for an individual to use it, how they might use it. That has to be contextualized in terms of their day-to-day usage, what makes the most sense for them, and how is it going to be effective. And then finally, I know that folks continually talk about human in the loop. I would say any sort of approach to supporting an AI tool rollout and then the training and support for higher education educators or even those future teachers that we're training. Think about AI as an amplifier of human input. I do frequently hear people criticize AI as something that, well, it's going to remove our ability to think. It's going to do all the work for us. And I'm a daily user of AI, and I can tell you that, in fact, AI actually challenges me when I think about it as an amplifier of what I've put into it and what I want to get out of it.
Thank you for that. And I wholeheartedly agree. One of my favorite saying is, you don't know what you don't know. And with that being said, there are a lot of folks that, don't know. So Stephen, I want to bring you in to help us think critically about all of this. As we know, there's a lot of momentum around AI, but we also can't just adopt these tools, as some of our colleagues have mentioned, without really understanding them more deeply. And from your perspective, I would love to hear, what should educators understand about how AI actually works and not just how to use it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I appreciate being here, especially as the person with the critical lens, or maybe the relatively critical lens. I will just say, just level setting, for the past 5 years, I've worked as a senior education systems and policy researcher at ASU's Center on Reinventing Public Education. I've actually recently left that role, though I'm still a collaborator, a research collaborator with ASU more generally. But just so you know, ASU is doing a lot of great work, but I'm actually not here to represent that work around AI. But when I was at the center, my engagement around AI in education was actually both around the sort of looking at how systems like school systems and districts were experimenting and doing innovation at that systems level, but then also doing some research in collaboration with RAND around what teacher preparation programs were doing. And the research is a little old; it's about a year old, so I can go into some of that if that's of interest to folks. But what I will say is, like, in doing all this research and working with folks doing interviews and going through survey data around like what people were trying to do in their systems around AI about a year ago, I came to actually my current kind of critical perspective, which was around two major disconnects. The first disconnect was around education leaders and kind of and I'm thinking of maybe the more visionary or forward-thinking ones, and how they were imagining AI being integrated and used and even setting policies for use. The disconnect between what teachers were actually experiencing on the ground, which were like problems of students using AI inappropriately, or they didn't know it was inappropriate, neither the students nor the teachers. So that was just like a really big, and I think a persistent disconnect. And then, of course, there's another disconnect that was the education leaders' perspectives on AI, and the fact that it wasn't sort of incorporating, at least in my perspective, a growing course of people outside of the education sector who had growing concerns around the risks and uncertainties of the technology, and without doing a full analysis, which I'm sure most people who are listening and watching have heard, as a new technology, AI is in some ways very similar to other technologies, especially technologies that have been brought into education. There's this promise to solve longstanding problems, but there's also a very real reality of them currently causing new ones. And so I think that that's something to appreciate, that that's not a new issue. However, there are major differences with AI. The attempt to integrate AI into education has been very fast. And I know it's funny because people feel like they're behind. And in fact, when we were looking at teacher preparation programs about a year ago, we were a bit lamenting the fact that they were not moving very quickly to integrate AI. However, Justin Reich, I don't know if other folks are familiar with his work. He's a great ed tech scholar and a critical ed tech scholar at MIT. He talks about the speed at which computers or the internet or other technologies were introduced and integrated into schools over years, if not decades, and how that's very different than the way AI has, and not necessarily by choice. I know a lot of people will say this. AI has come into schools unbidden and unasked for in students' pockets. This happened over the matter of years, at least when you think about like chatbots. So that's something very different. Again, I won't try to take up too much time going through it, but the tech is changing very quickly. It's very unpredictable even now. Even now, we have creators of AI technology saying that they, in fact, don't know how to train the large language models to do exactly what they want all the time. So obviously, this feels a little bit like a huge risk compared to something like I've heard many folks say it's like a calculator. I feel like this is an asymmetry. There's a huge amount of money being poured into AI in a way that is different and is another asymmetry in comparison to other technologies, both broadly and also in ed tech. The kind of push to bring AI into everything, I think maybe should give us a moment to pause and say, well, why is that? And then the last thing I'll just mention here is that the impacts that AI is having on the economy more broadly and the environment are shaping up to be extreme or potentially extreme. And again, even in comparison to other technologies. So I guess what I'll say here is, and maybe I can kind of leave it at this question, which is, is this, when we talk about AI literacy, and given all these points about the way that we actually are like, I think some realities that we need to face around AI as a technology, like how can we use this moment to actually interrogate our own assumptions about why we need to be AI literate in the first place and why AI needs to be in schools at all? And I won't try to do like an exhaustive list, but I do think it's really interesting, even in this conversation and many other conversations I've had, you can start to create a bit of a typology of like what do people think the real reasons are here? Is it economic? Is it because teachers need help because their jobs are fundamentally very difficult, which I would absolutely agree with as a former educator? Is it because students are using AI to cheat, and so we really have no choice, kind of cheat using in the normal system? So, what are the reasons that are motivating our push towards integrating AI? And I think that would also give us some clarity around what exactly we even mean by AI literacy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that lends to a wonderful question regarding AI literacy. And it sounds like from your point of view, it's like, how do we really prepare? And I think that's a wonderful ask. And I would love to think about that a little bit. And I'm going to lean in a little bit here with Bridget and just ask, like, you shared a little bit earlier about how higher ed classrooms are using AI and some of the resources that are in place right now. What advice do you think that you would offer others who are looking to embed AI literacy into coursework or clinical experiences?
Great. Yeah, so we actually just concluded a project supported by Axim that was figuring out why learning innovation does and does not scale. And that is super important for us because as we're talking about how to embed things into coursework and how we actually, make this actually a natural part of the daily experience of faculty, it all draws on what we actually learned there. So first, I would say there are great examples of faculty that are using AI for whether it's drafting, tutoring, feedback, improving and enhancing the actual support and grading that we're providing for students. People have felt ASU built something called a syllabot, where they're actually helping with the design of your syllabus. So there's all kinds of things that people are touching in terms of the inside the classroom when we're talking about the AI integration. But I think for me, the biggest problem is if you think about AI, about training faculty on tools, because you don't want to just focus on teaching them about tools. You want to actually think about the problems and pain points they have naturally, and you have to think about the course and how you redesign your courses, and not just think about from like a workshop approach to try and train people on AI literacy. Like, how do we actually embed and integrate some of these practices into, you got to put it in the water. For example, one of the things is you could try and have a workshop teaching faculty about AI literacy. What we've learned is that you have to not just you have to give them resources and time and support. They do best when they're learning in a community of practice. That really helps them be able to integrate a lot of these solutions into their work. But it really has to start with, they need to be solving a problem they're actually dealing with. That's the best way. I mean, any of us who uses AI, the only reason you use it because it actually solves your problem. So we have to, empathy is the first step of design. If you want to create resources and solutions that meet people's needs so that they will support our students, you have to really care about their problems and structure many of the ways that we train and teach around that. So helping support them with ways to enhance their courses, address some of the pain points that faculty are already experiencing just naturally, and ways that you can embed and integrate AI literacy into those conversations, into those practices. That's going to be really helpful. We found that a structured faculty cohorts, if you're going to try and think about integrating AI literacy, think about that. They don't get enough peer connected learning experiences naturally. They really love that, but you actually have to resource it. You have to give them time. Don't just expect them to do more on top of everything they're doing. What we learned is that faculty move really fast. Like when we started this project, I think the premise was, why doesn't innovation scale? And I think one would naturally assume, well, faculty, maybe they don't want to. No. It turns out there are massive systems and blockers that are outside of the faculty's control that are actually making things more difficult. And for us, the thing that really rose to the top is that leadership matters, and chairs and deans have to signal permission. They have to set guardrails. They have to make it clear that this work that you're doing, this extra work, it counts and it's important, because otherwise, that is one of the things that really caught us up. Is we thought that most of our focus when we were thinking about the classroom was going to be focused on faculty. It's not. Chairs and deans, how do you actually build meaningful professional development to actually teach them how to be enablers of innovation and change? And I think when we're thinking about literacy, how do you build development and strategies for chairs and deans to be the allies of what you want, right? So I think sometimes we think, I have a thing I want people to do, so I'm just going to tell them to do it. And we don't think from a systems view of what are the reasons why those things don't naturally happen? What are the naturally existing problems that already exist that you could find a way to use this approach to actually solve those problems? Because then you're not forcing behavior, you're actually inviting people to be a collaborator. Faculty love that. Students love that. Invite them in to be, igniting their curiosity about how should we integrate literacy? Not just this is an edict that you got in a memo from on high. How do we actually make it so that we are all part of a learning community? This is a learning ecosystem, and we want to figure out the way that we can do this for students. And we also want to figure out how we can actually help other institutions. Lastly, I would just say that if you're going to try and really focus on integrating AI literacy and think about ways that you can embed these things into coursework and clinical experiences, I would really focus on gateway and high enrollment courses. That is going to give you the most opportunity to get the most data, the most insights. It is really where the great value can be, and it's frankly where all the blockers are. Like if we have a lot of examples right now where we're trying to fix DFW rates, and that's where you want to target. So I would just say, empathy, first step of design. Really care about the people you're trying to serve. Build the supports they need so that this is their idea, and you want to invite them to be a peer and a partner to actually build the best solutions for our students. It is always easier. It is always better. I promise you. There might be the easy button. You want to just tell people what to do. Doesn't work. I work with 19 universities. Does not work. So those are that's my advice for how to embed it. But I would say there's a lot of use cases, and it's really great. But again, I want to see less isolated tinkering. I want to see more collective learning, and as a community, as a national sector, I think students expect that we talk to each other. Students expect that we help each other, we bring each other along, and we have to hold ourselves accountable to operate the way that we would want our students to.
Agreed. And I wholeheartedly echo your thought around making sure that we're leading and guiding and not just expecting everyone to just jump on a bandwagon. And you made some great points just about having your chairs and your deans be on board, and how that can kind of shape and frame a lot, and really rallying others to understand what it means for AI literacy, and to integrate these tools. And I think similarly, the framework explicitly calls on registered apprenticeship programs to use the framework to guide curriculum development, or to embed AI literacy into existing learning pathways. Kim, can you talk to us a little bit about how apprenticeship models can integrate AI literacy into on-the-job training? We kind of got a really good eye view from Bridget, and just talking about that ecosystem. But yeah, we'd love to hear from you about an insight about that.
Yes, can I first just respond to some things that Bridget said? Because I agree to so much
Absolutely.
of what she said. And I want to say that I really believe in faculty. They have deep knowledge in their field. They are accustomed to working autonomously. And when you support them in the ways that she was discussing, you will see innovation really take off. When you give them the right tools and the right conditions and the support, it's magical, and I've seen it many times. And I absolutely agree with the community of practice model for sure. Okay, so let me address apprenticeships. Registered federal apprenticeships have some specific features that I want to mention. And one is that you have to have on-the-job training, you have to have instruction that's aligned with that training, and you have to have wage progression. And within Texas, we look at the educational aid pathway as one very appropriate pathway for registered federal apprenticeships for teaching. Because those individuals are already serving in schools, they're there all day. It provides an outstanding opportunity to provide that intense clinical experience that we see in our residency programs, but for years. And then aligning instruction with that provides ample opportunity to practice and apply what you are learning in courses, to the instruction of students, to planning, and so on. With respect to the registered federal apprenticeship program, I think it fits this notion very well, where we could start to think about embedding AI integrated tools and strategies in the design of instruction, the support for administrative tasks, and then thinking about what that looks like for what a school wants to see with a new teacher coming into the field, how they want to support teaching and learning, individualized instruction, all of those goals, and then actually applying it with students under the supervision of an experienced teacher that you're co-teaching with. So I think the Registered Federal Apprenticeship Program can really support those goals. The wage progression is a detail that I probably don't want to get into here in terms of this discussion, but the apprenticeships in general, I'd want to make sure everyone understands that it's not like having an internship. It is a much more formalized experience that is tied to instruction and the application of what you're learning in the field. Did that answer your question, Sabrina?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And as you were speaking, my wheels were turning, and it leads me to understand that there's still a lot of gaps that are missing, that folks are not understanding. And as we seek to learn, it makes me think about what do educator preparation and apprenticeship programs need to better integrate AI literacy and prepare for the next generation of educators and workforce. And you all have named some wonderful ideas, but I wonder, Suzanne, do you have any insights or any ideas that you think would fit into this scheme of things?
I definitely have ideas. I think, listening to everybody, we're all very excited about the themes that are emerging from our conversation here. And similar to the empowerment of faculty, I very much live in the space of thinking about third space, where faculty and students come together, and that students are equally as enthusiastic. While they might have some resistance, or maybe they don't have knowledge or experience, they are eager to learn. So it's not about curiosity. I think it's very much about the uncertainty. So when we talk about resistance, I think, at least from our observation, some of that has evolved into inquiry, which is really great when we're talking about being critical around these practices and implementation. And so I want to give an example just because I think sometimes the use case helps, where I see how these experiences have transformed their approach, meeting students and engagement with faculty and leaders. And that is, we haven't really officially announced, I'll do it here, where we're in the midst of creating a faculty student third space podcast around AI, because students and faculty have expressed this interest in having conversation, but to make it more transparent. So what that means is these gaps that we're trying to identify, while maybe anecdotal in some spaces, at least our use case and conversation can help to drive and identify where we can grow and improve. So I see the same in the context of teacher education and preparation, is this enthusiasm. So having access to those spaces and to teachers who are interested in and others who are interested in a different way, want to find that space to engage with one another, but want to learn quickly and keep pace with everything. So I do think it's about not necessarily just policies and maybe having the strict policies and maybe no support, but also having innovation and maybe no guardrails, but finding where that alignment can take place. So I also just look at all the experiences right now that are popping up to address that challenge. And it made me think of something that was just recently announced, which is in Virginia. I believe it's the University of Virginia is doing AI for VA, where they're partnering students with industry partners to do coaching and instruction around AI. And I think it's those types of initiatives, similar to the themes that we've heard from a number of panelists today, that will help us to not just think about the innovation, but also, and I see in the chat, conversations about how to critically think about the impact.
Great, thank you. And I would love for all of us to imagine it's National AI Literacy Day in 2027. What do you hope to see happening in our educator preparation, higher ed, and apprenticeship programs nationwide? And what does building an AI literate and ready workforce look like? And anyone can feel free to unmute the answer.
Yeah, I'll jump in here because I think that there's it's interesting in this conversation and other conversations, really to make sure that when we're looking forward into the next year, I think we want to be very clear about how there's multiple elements to this literacy. There's multiple dimensions, and there's the dimensions. I think Suzanne alluded to this at the end of what you just said. We want to make sure, I think, that educators and students, really everybody, kind of understands the external context of AI, where it came from, what its impacts are, what's driving the development of the technology, what's driving its economic integrations into different parts of our society. And we also want to have, alongside that, the internal understanding of how can AI be used responsibly by the folks in the system. I think making that very clear, that there is this sort of there are these two tracks to understanding AI, and maybe we can kind of subdivide it. But I think that just if we came to that next year and people were like, yes, I'm understanding sort of the larger macro context of AI, but I'm also understanding how I want to use it, how my educators are using it, how my students are using it. I think having both of those kind of dual lenses would be a great place to be in a year.
I'll jump in maybe that central to what I've said, and I'll just sum it up here again, is this shared AI literacy, which I think is just mirroring, what others have said here. But what that means from my perspective is that a year from now, there's an even greater alignment and connection, explicit connection between education, workforce, and community. So moving away from the siloed approaches, I like to think of it as collective over competitive or collaborative over competitive. And that's, I think, similar even to some themes earlier from Bridget, where we're working together rather than working alongside one another. So I think that's really what I have envisioned for the future.
I can jump into, I think time is moving super fast, so my ideas might be a little out there, but I think things are happening so quickly. I expect that by this time next year that most of higher ed a large portion has followed Purdue's lead, and they have embedded AI literacy into graduation requirements, and they will actually make it so that every student in every major is expected to demonstrate applied competency that will have made real gains. I see it now happening of systematically integrating work-based learning into curriculum and making it so that AI literacy and AI, it's a tested skill, that so each graduate is leaving not just with exposure to AI, but with actual experience using it in real world work-based learning experiences. I think you're going to see an increase in the amount of the capability of the sector to deliver personalized learning. But what I think we need to wrestle with is I think we need to start graduating students who don't just have AI literacy, but they have a personal, ongoing learning practice about AI, where they use tools to, they actually have a consistent practice where they're not just, hey, I figured out how to use AI. I know how AI literacy, safety, I'm good, set it and forget it. They've actually got a consistent practice where they are going back, revisiting and testing new tools that is actually a part of who they are and how they think and how they learn in the world. Because things are going to keep moving fast. We need to train people who have that kind of muscle, and they start within the institution, but we have to make sure that students have almost a daily practice where they're now used to. It's not that you went to college and you learned and then now you work. It's that now I have a learning practice about how I'm going to use the new tools and strategies that are available to solve the new problems, because we want to unleash all the potential of all of our graduates.
I'll add another thought is that I would recommend to any of our listeners at their institutions that it is important to recommend and resource efforts to achieve AI literacy. It is moving very quickly, and if we want to adequately prepare our graduates for the workforce is telling us that they want individuals who can come onto the job and that they already know how to use AI and they are AI literate. So I would encourage us to get right on this and make sure that we are preparing our students for the future.
Wow, thank you all. And I hope that we can all come back in 2027 and send some of these things happen, if not all. So I appreciate your well wishes here. And we do have some questions in the chat. And I, of course, want to quickly I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our panelists for you identifying some amazing themes and putting up with all my questions during this webinar. And I graciously thank you. But I do want to get into some of these questions. We have one question. What role does critical media literacy have in informing AI literacy, and to what extent does it fit in the framework?
It's foundational. It's absolutely totally connected. I think that's a great question. I think that the nice thing is that we have groups at campuses around the country and in various communities and pockets who've been working on this media literacy piece for a bit, because we've been seeing the negative effect of that prior to when we started really scaffolding the AI literacy work. So I think there's actually aligned architecture. There's similar challenges. I think they're very complementary in terms of helping our students evaluate sources, question responsibly using AI. I think there's a lot in this broader space where we were seeing some trends with students, only being inclined to spend time with people they agree with. This idea of AI work slop. All of this, I think, is about discernment. It's about we don't produce widgets, we produce learners, and we teach them how to think critically. So this is our job. This is like literally square down the center for us. And I think, unfortunately, the challenges keep growing by the day. So it's not like we ever become we develop mastery at handling media literacy and AI literacy, but I think that we have the capability and the bone structure to be able to tackle this. But I think it's foundational. It's a big part of it.
Yeah, and can I just add there? I think that question, I'm assuming it's maybe directed towards what we do with students and student media literacy, student sort of discernment. But I actually think that there is something really important here for teacher prep and educators to understand that they need to be more careful. I think, and maybe this goes a little bit to Bridget's point before about kind of going up the chain, the organizational chain, and realizing that you really need to we all need to sort of back up and understand that we're living in a different media universe, and how we as adults and how decision makers, how educators sort of encounter media, and the way that they're even giving instruction and grading. And I think that there's some really big questions here that point to like structural reimagining of education. Not to pull too much on that thread, but like I think that there is something here. So the media literacy question, I just hope we also bring that to everybody up the chain, not just to the students who also need to have that. We need to have that conversation.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, how would the panelists define AI literacy? I suspect there is a lot of variation among the panel.
Well, I don't mean to be too funny here, but, or I don't know if it's funny, haha, but I don't know how many of you will be attending the showing of the AI documentary this weekend, but I will be getting my tickets if you haven't seen that it's getting released. It was shown at Sundance. And I think that it's really relevant when we talk about how AI is profiled, and we're talking about media literacy and how we're defining it. I don't know that I would almost go to Ed Safe's AI definition, but there are variable definitions, of course, talking about how we, whether we're critical, creative, evaluative, foundational. I think we have our working definition at the institution. I don't know of one common specific other than the many ways in which our wide world has defined it currently, but I'd be interested in what the group has to say around that as well.
I would just add, knowing how to use it, evaluate it, have discernment about it, and apply it reasonably, like in a way that actually produces better quality work. That's I think that some of us are like that. We can identify when it's actually happening to us. We can actually diagnose that AI is involved. But I think unfortunately with images, that's becoming more and more difficult.
All right. Well, thank you all. And I believe that answers all the questions that our attendees had today. And we also do have a short, quick poll for you all. And also we wanted to, again, this webinar is recorded, it will be shared. You'll also receive some national AI literacy events that are happening this week that we do hope that you will be a part of in spreading awareness and also AI literacy. And again, by all means, thank you, Kim, Suzanne, Bridget, and Stephen, for sharing your time and your thoughts today. Again, if you all would like to share any contact information, so any of our attendees could reach out, please feel free to do so in the chat. Or please forward all your emails to the Pathways Alliance at innovateedunyc.org, and we're happy to forward them to our amazing panelists today. I thank you all. And again, I would be remiss if I didn't say I appreciate you all for your time. Happy National AI Literacy Week. And we hope to cross paths with you all soon. Thank you so much, everyone.